Order. I can now announce the outcome of the divisions on motions relating to the United Kingdom's withdrawal from and future relationship with the European Union. In respect of Mr Clark's motion C, Customs Union, the ayes were 273, the noes were 276. So the noes have it. In respect of Mr Nicholas Bowles's motion D, Common Market 2.0, the ayes were 261, the noes were 282. So the noes have it. In respect of Mr Peter Kyle's motion E, Confirmatory Public Vote, the ayes were 280, the noes were 292. So the noes have it. In respect of Joanna Cherry's motion G, Parliamentary Supremacy, the ayes were 191, the noes were 292. So the noes have it. The list showing how honourable members voted will be published in the usual way on the Commons Vote app and website and in Hansard. Points of order. Yes, the Secretary of State. Point of order, Secretary of State, Mr Stephen Barclay.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker. This is now the second time the House has considered a wide variety of options for a way forward. It has once again failed to find a clear majority for any of the options. And yet the result of the House's decision on Friday not to endorse the withdrawal agreement means that the default legal position is that the UK will leave the EU in just 11 days' time. To secure any further extension, the government will have to put forward a credible proposition to the EU as to what we will do with that extra time. This House has continuously rejected leaving without a deal, just as it has rejected not leaving at all. Therefore, the only option is to find a way through which allows the UK to leave with a deal. The government continues to believe that the best course of action is to do so as soon as possible. If the House were to agree a deal this week, it may still be possible to avoid holding European parliamentary elections. Mr Speaker, Cabinet will meet in the morning to consider the results of tonight's vote and how we should proceed.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Jeremy Corbyn.
On a point of order, it's disappointing that no solution has won a majority this evening. But I remind the House that the Prime Minister's unacceptable deal has been overwhelmingly rejected 3 times. The margin of defeat for one of the options tonight was very narrow indeed, and the Prime Minister's deal has been rejected by very large majorities on 3 occasions. If it's good enough for the Prime Minister to have 3 chances at her deal, then I suggest that possibly the House should have a chance to consider again the options that we had before us today in a debate on Wednesday, so that the House can succeed where the Prime Minister has failed in presenting a credible economic relationship with Europe for the future that prevents us crashing out with no deal.
Thank you to the Leader. Yes, point of order, Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It would indeed be an outrage if the government sought to bring back its deal. It really is about time that the government accepted reality, that the deal that the government put forward has been defeated 3 times, with the largest defeat in parliamentary history. Now, Mr Speaker...
No, the right honourable gentleman is entitled to be heard, and believe me, notwithstanding the shouting from a sedentary position, he will be heard. That's the be-all and end-all of it. It's as simple as that. The right honourable gentleman will be heard. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I acknowledge that I'm disappointed that tonight that we haven't won with revoke, with having a people's vote and a single market customs union. But the reality, Mr Speaker, is that these votes on 2 occasions have won by a very small number. and we need to try and see where we can find consensus and work together. But fundamentally, from us that represent seats in Scotland, we voted to remain in the European Union. And tonight, Mr Speaker, a vast majority of Scottish MPs have voted to revoke Article 50. A vast majority of Scottish MPs have voted for a people's vote. A vast majority of Scottish MPs have voted to stay in the single market and customs union. It is crystal clear to us from Scotland that our votes in this House are disrespected. And it's becoming increasingly clear to the people of Scotland that if we want to secure our future as a European nation, then we're going to have to take our own responsibilities. And, Mr Speaker, the case is this. Sovereignty rests with the people of Scotland, not with this House. The day is coming where we will determine our own future, and it will be as an independent country.
Thank you. Yes, I'll take a point of order from Mr Nicholas Bowles.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker, I have given everything to an attempt to find a compromise that can take this country out of the European Union while maintaining our economic strength and our political cohesion. I accept I have failed. I have failed chiefly because my party refuses to compromise. I regret, therefore, to announce that I can no longer sit for this party.
Oh, Nick, don't go. Come on. I say.
The honourable gentleman has told the House. Indeed. Of course, I shall come to other honourable members. A point of order, Sir Vince Cable.
No, Mr Speaker, it is even clearer than it was the last time we had indicative votes that there is one compromise option that has very substantial support. There is the largest number of votes in the House for a people's vote, larger than last time. Is it not possible to combine the two and therefore find a way forward through a consensus?
Well, the right honourable gentleman's question is, of course, of a rhetorical character. It invites no response from me, but he's registered his view, upon which I'm sure colleagues will reflect. Point of order, Mr Nigel Dodds.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And isn't it the case, just to remind the House, that the only proposition that has ever had a majority in this House is the Brady Amendment? That is a fact. Whatever members may think, whatever they may say, that is the proposition that has had a majority in this House and could allow the withdrawal agreement to go through. And as Chancellor Merkel visits the Irish Prime Minister this Thursday, can I say that there is still an opportunity, Mr Speaker, for the Prime Minister and the Government to prosecute the issue which has bedevilled her withdrawal agreement throughout, the backstop. And that issue still needs to be addressed, and if it is addressed, then we can be in business.
Point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just looking at these figures, I'd like to reinforce the comments from the Right Honourable Member for Twickenham. I regret what the Honourable Member for Grantham and Statham has had to do, but if you were to link to his proposal the opportunity to have a public vote, we would have a huge majority in this House. And the idea that we would avoid doing that for fear of the democratic moment of the European elections is frankly absurd. Why would we be afraid of one democratic event and for fear of that avoid a further one? That makes no sense. The Prime Minister's deal is dead. We should look at where the majorities in this House lie. They lie with a softer Brexit going against a people's vote to the country.
Thank you. Point of order, the Father of the House, Mr Kenneth Clarke.
Mr Speaker, with the help of the people who work with me, I've got a damn sight nearer a majority in this House than anybody else has so far, apart from the rather curious and now historic Malta-House compromise, which I fear is dead. Just three is quite near. We cannot go on with everybody voting against every proposition. And the difficulty is, there were people who want a people's vote who wouldn't vote for my motion because they thought they were going to get a people's vote. There were people, the Scottish nationalists, who wanted Common Market 2, so wouldn't vote for mine because they wanted Common Market 2. all of them actually have nothing against mine. If they continue to do that, they will fail. To the Honourable Lady, I would say, if you add the people's vote to a motion like mine, you lose votes all over the place and in the Labour Party. And you lose more than you gain. They should actually accept that they haven't got a majority yet for the people's vote and vote for something which they have no objection at all to as a fallback position. But that, Mr. Speaker, is politics, and I sometimes think that this particular Parliament that I find myself sitting in is not very political at the moment, and it is confounding the general public.
Thank you. Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, what you don't know is that there was an effort made a week ago to put forward composite motions. And unfortunately, despite the efforts of a number of us, that was resisted. However, as the Father of the House rightly identifies, there is undoubtedly, and that's why it's a three-stage process, a way of getting this together. The Honourable Gentleman would let me just explain. The reason why, as the Father of the House knows, many of us couldn't support the Customs Union was because it didn't have the regulatory alignment, which I must say, the Labour Party, who unfortunately didn't get round to tabling anything today. But if we put the Customs Union, regulatory alignment and a people's vote together, the Honourable Member can then vote against it. But if you look at the figures, and if I could have the Honourable Gentleman not yelling in my ear, there is every chance on Wednesday we can find a compromise. And Mr. Speaker, the other thing that needs, yes, but it needs to be said, I am very upset, as I'm sure many others are, at the Honourable Member for Stamford and Grantham, who is a fine champion for his community, to making the decision that he has made. But he's wrong, because he has been right to do what he's tried to achieve. And the reason his motion failed was because it didn't have the longevity of being in the withdrawal agreement. And on that basis, again, a compromise does exist that can get a majority.
Thank you. Point of order, Dr. Julian Lewis.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, can I, within the rules of order, just point out that a clear majority of Conservative MPs, no fewer than 159, including tellers, voted a week ago that we should leave the European Union without a deal. So I find it very strange that everybody assumes that because of the House's position as a whole, that this cannot be a way forward, because if it was always going to be left to the House of Commons, dominated as it is by Remainers, to have the final say, there was never any hope for a referendum to achieve anything whatsoever.
The Right Honourable Gentleman has made his own point in his own inimitable way, and he gives every indication of being well satisfied with his prodigious efforts this evening. Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The consequence of tonight's votes is that the House has voted in favour of nothing, and as a result, in 11 days' time, the United Kingdom will leave the European Union without an agreement unless the Prime Minister, who's just left the chamber, acts. One of the things we have now voted 3 times to tell the Prime Minister is that we will not accept leaving the European Union without an agreement. The last time by 400 votes to 160. The Prime Minister indicated a week ago that she would respect the will of the House, and I was going to ask on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, whether the Prime Minister had given you any indication she intends to make a statement from that dispatch box to the effect that she will now be writing to the European Council to seek a further extension to Article 50.
The short answer to the right honourable gentleman is that she has given me no such indication, and I have received no such indication from any other minister. Indeed, we've just had the results of the votes. I have announced them only a matter of minutes ago, and there has been no communication to me from government ministers. But if that were to change, I would, of course, notify the House, or it would become apparent to the House ere long. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, it's probably worth recalling that last Friday the withdrawal agreement, as negotiated by our Prime Minister, achieved more votes than any of the options we voted on today.
Requires no response, but I'm grateful to the honourable lady. Point of order, Mr. Peter Kyle.
I think that now is the time for a little reflection and humility. I would have expected a little more humility from the Brexit Secretary in his statement, because when it comes to the need for a majority, we are all in this together, and that includes government too. The bottom line is, from the last 2 sessions of these indicative votes, the proposition that myself and the member for Sedgefield have offered has come top, and tonight came within 8 votes of his own proposition, the proposition put forward by government. Is now not the case. If there is not a majority for anything outright, Mr. Speaker, we have to start looking to see how minorities in this House can be brought together in order to get the blockage that is within the House of Commons sorted, so that we can move forward as our politics can move forward, the Commons can move forward, and our country can get the resolution it needs. Mr. Speaker, can you help guide us how government can start acting with humility, reaching out and working with those of us with propositions, rather than sticking to its guns?
Well, the honourable gentleman, I fear he invests me with powers I don't claim to possess. It's late at night. I think we have to await, as Macmillan used to say, events, and see what transpires tomorrow. And God willing, I shall be in my place, and I will always seek to facilitate the House, which it's the responsibility of the Speaker to do. But I can't say with any confidence what will happen, and in that respect I think I'm frankly not in a minority. I think most colleagues would say with confidence that they don't know what is to follow. Point of order, Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought in the light of the words blockage that was just used, and the suggestion that somehow or other there is something wrong with our democratic system, could I just simply say this, may I, as a point of order, just to recall the fact that Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act 2018 quite clearly states as a matter of law that the European Communities Act 1972 is repealed on exit day, and if that exit day happens to be April the 12th, so be it. That is the law of the land. That is something which we ought to hang on to, because that is the anchor of the referendum for which the British people voted.
Honourable gentleman, he's represented his own position correctly, and I know that because I've heard the honourable gentleman make that point with comparable eloquence on several occasions. Whether he has entirely fairly characterised the position of the honourable gentleman, the member for Hove, I don't know, but the honourable gentleman member for Hove will doubtless study the official report and make his own assessment. Point of order, Mrs. Ellen Goodman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is obviously a very disappointing evening for all of us. Unlike some of the other people who've made points of order, I'm not going to promote the merits, great though they are, of the motion put forward by the Father of the House. But I just do want to point out that the government has an opportunity tomorrow to bring something forward to resolve this. The House has another day on Wednesday, and we might consider how we best use that, perhaps by looking at some different way of addressing these problems. We've got the time booked, so although this is desperate and last minute, this is not the end.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the honourable lady. Point of order, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, this point of order may involve you. The most popular, the motion which had the greatest number of votes was E on the confirmatory public vote, although that, as my honourable friend has pointed out, was fewer than the number of votes for the Prime Minister's deal on Friday, can I invite you to consider whether you would get party leaders together to see whether those two could be put as a run-off with a free vote across the House?
Always reflect on points that colleagues make to me, but I'm not anticipating what might happen in days to come. The honourable gentleman's made his own point in his own way. I don't mean it in any unkind or discourteous sense, but it's a point I've heard floated in parts of the popular prints in recent days, but that doesn't invest it with a validity which it might otherwise lack. Point of order, Mr Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I profess myself upset that the Father of the House's motion came within 3 votes, particularly given that 5 members of my own party who profess to want a softer Brexit voted against it and could have made a decisive impact on tonight's decision. However, Mr Speaker, what I would ask of you is, given, as the point my friend from Bishop Auckland has made, we are having this again on Wednesday, are you able to give us any early indications of what procedure on Wednesday will look like, when motions can start to be tabled, and whether there will be a new way of looking at this in order to see if we can come to some conclusive outcome?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The only early indication that I can give him is that I think it is reasonable, on the basis of what was passed earlier today in the business of the House motion, to suppose that the right honourable gentleman, the member for West Dorset, will be carefully contemplating the intended procedure for Wednesday. Specifically, I think it's reasonable to expect that he will be looking to table a business of the House motion, and from that the honourable gentleman will gather what the right honourable member for West Dorset has in mind. Colleagues will be able to take a view about that. Moreover, just as colleagues have spoken to each other in recent days, bidding for support for particular options, it is open to colleagues to communicate with each other about these matters before Wednesday, and I rather imagine that they will do so. Precisely what procedure is envisaged, I can't say, nor is it self-evident that there can be only one procedure proposed. There may well be a number of alternative ideas circulating in colleagues' minds, and I can't say more than that. We will have to see. Well, there's nothing very significant about that. There's a sort of knowing grunt from somebody on the Treasury bench as though something remarkably significant or suspicious has been said, but neither of those things is so. Point of order, Mr Graham Jones.
Mr Speaker, to follow on from my honourable friend's comments from Stoke Central about the influence that you may have on the business of the House motion, if any, on Wednesday, given the fact that we need now to be brutal about this. We need to look. The Prime Minister's deal was last defeated by 58. That's the worst option, so that gets taken off the table. Are we going to have an eliminatory process? Customs Common Market 2 lost by 21. The People's Vote confirmatory ballot lost by 12. The revocation by 11. And clearly top of the table was the Father of the House motion on the Customs Union. Are we going to have a brutal process, and can you influence that, where we get to one outcome on Wednesday, because it needs to happen?
I would say to the honourable gentleman, I don't cavil at his point, and I don't want him to think I'm being pedantic, but I dislike the use of the word brutal. I'm not in favour of brutality. I am in favour of clarity, of decisiveness, of resolution. And insofar, well, he doesn't need to apologise, insofar as that requires some concentrated thinking, I agree with that. Look, some colleagues will be pleased with the outcome of tonight's vote. The honourable gentleman, the member for Shipley, is noisily yelling his approval of that observation, beaming as he stands by me. Other colleagues are disappointed. We are where we are. Nothing has won tonight. In what do I take comfort? Well, Roger Federer put on a majestic masterclass in Miami last night, so I'm happy about that. And of course I'm happy that although nothing won tonight, and here in this chamber, and at the Emirates, Arsenal did win 2-0. So, I just have to content myself with that for tonight. I appreciate that Newcastle members won't be so pleased, and we shall have to see what happens tomorrow. I'm sorry that I can't add, but I feel that colleagues have ventilated their points, and it's right that they should do so, and I don't think we can advance matters further this evening. So what I suggest is that we look to getting a decent night's rest and recharge our batteries and try to do our duty with resolution but good humour tomorrow. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
Move that this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. If colleagues who are toddling out of the chamber, including past the member who has the adjournment, can do so quickly and quietly, that would be greatly appreciated. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very pleased to have secured this adjournment debate tonight on the Bladen Quarry landfill site. It's a matter of great concern to my constituents in the communities surrounding the site. My constituency has more than its fair share of landfill sites, both in the past and more recently with landfill sites either side of the main road from the town of Bladen itself out to the west. So complaints about landfill sites are a constant. In 2016, there was a major incident at one of the sites, Pathhead, where there was a period of months when a heavy sulphurous smell hung over large parts of Ryton and the surrounding area, causing intense concern about the impact on health and seriously affecting residents' ability to enjoy a normal life. Thankfully, that site is now closed and is being restored, but it has left an enduring concern about the effect that landfill sites have on our communities, and in particular on the established former mining community of Stargate and Crook Hill, which are within just a few hundred yards of the site and had to endure odours and other problems throughout its life. But also it affects the Stella area as well. It's in that context that this debate and the concern of my constituents must be understood, Madam Deputy Speaker. So turning to the subject of tonight's debate, Bladen Quarry. Bladen Quarry is a landfill site in the west of my constituency. It's located in the village of Greenside, but is surrounded by the communities of Greenside, Winlayton, Barlow, Stargate, Ryton, Bladenburn and Bladen itself. It is very close to each of those communities, and each has felt the impact of the site over many years. And over the years there have been a number of different site operators: Premier Waste, Nairamax, Octagon Green Solutions, each bringing its own problems. The site is now owned by a company called Recyclogical, but following the refusal of a transfer of the environmental permit to them last year, Octagon Green Solutions remain as permit holders and site operators, an issue which I intend to return to later. Over the period that my predecessor, Dave Anderson, was the Member of Parliament for Bladen, and while I myself was a local councillor, residents have consistently, or perhaps I should say persistently, complained about the Bladen Quarry landfill site. So this is by no means a new issue, but it's a very current one. I will give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I spoke to her beforehand to seek her permission to do so, but because her case is very similar to ones that I've had in my constituency of Strangford, I wanted to perhaps make a small intervention. Does the Honourable Lady agree that it is essential that quarries and landfill sites are held in the highest standard when it comes to neighbourhood issues, and just a little common sense and perhaps a little bit of money as well from quarries in due season can go a long way in good neighbour relations and subsequently in less complaints? In my council that I served on, Ardsborough Council, which is now Ards and North Down Council, there were some issues and we were able to have those issues addressed. So does the Honourable Lady agree that people have a right to live in peace at night and without offensive smells, no matter what the postcode is?
Thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I do, of course, agree with his last statement. However, I will disagree with some of his earlier comments, because I think the time is right for us now to go beyond monitoring and controlling and whatever, and we need a totally different approach on landfill for the benefit of our communities. So, as I was saying, over the period that my predecessor was in post and when I was a councillor, there were persistent complaints about the site. So it's by no means a new issue, but a very current one. And most recently, about 2 months ago, as they have done so on many previous occasions, many residents contacted me about a bad smell in the air. And I do call it a smell because calling it an odour, as the official documents do, is far too polite. In fact, residents didn't need to contact me about it, as I could most definitely smell it myself when I was at home. The smell was persistent and very unpleasant. Some people reported the smell to the Environment Agency's incident hotline. Many more complained to myself, to councillors and to neighbours. I raised the issue with the Environment Agency team, who were responsive as always. Residents were very pleased to hear in mid-February that the site had been stopped from receiving waste for a period of up to 2 weeks, while the operators fixed the problem of the smells from uncovered waste, which was affecting our communities. The required action was taken and the tip reopened for waste, but problems continue. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is just one of the latest incidents at the site which have really blighted our communities over a number of years. And, frankly, our communities have had enough. They have had enough of bad smells, enough of heavy vehicles on our country lanes, enough of litter from the site and the trucks and the rubbish scattered in our fields, enough of dust from the site. Frankly, they have had enough of the site and want to see the site closed. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, do I. This will come as no surprise to the site owner or the operator. I have made my views clear in the site's liaison meetings whenever we had them, and they're very heated very often, and elsewhere, so it's no secret. In early 2015, during a period of high winds, and despite advice from the Environment Agency, there was a huge escape of litter from the site, with litter sprayed around the hedges, in fields and in trees. Our usually green and pleasant area was now festooned with rubbish. It was, frankly, disgusting, not easy to clear, and still today you can see the tatter of plastic bags in trees and bushes around the periphery. It created a huge outcry, with residents protesting, angry at this littering of their local environment. This was environmental vandalism of the highest order. No layperson could fail to see the devastating nature of this rubbish escape. Astonishingly to us, after consideration by the Environment Agency legal team, we were told that it was not possible to prosecute this breach, even though the scale of the devastation was clear to local residents. But over the years there have been other issues too. The Wind Lake Action Group was set up by local residents in one area after many people found dust was settling on their cars, and they were extremely concerned about the impact that this and other issues at the site were having on their health, something which remains a concern for local people, particularly in the context of the major problem which I mentioned earlier at the Pathhead site, where we had really bad smells over a long period of time. And there's the height to which rubbish is being tipped. I met some residents recently in Stargate, Brighton, who showed me photographs of an uninterrupted view over from where they were living in Stargate, past the landfill site, to a neighbouring village. When we lifted up our eyes from the photograph, all we could see was a mound of rubbish with a digger on the top of it. The Environment Agency, I know, have been out to check the height, and some action is, I understand, being taken, but this tip has changed our landscape. And then there are the lorries, large lorries transporting waste from other parts of the country to Blaydon, because it's not even our rubbish that's being tipped at the site. It comes from all over. Our waste goes to an energy from waste site under the South of Tyne Waste Partnership. Not only is transporting that rubbish inefficient, transporting trucks full of rubbish for miles and miles, but it's a hazard on the narrow roads immediately surrounding the site, creating mud and dust for other road users. The Environment Agency, with whom I meet frequently, have sent me a list of enforcement action taken since 2012. I'm sure the Minister will have a copy of it, which shows that there have been a number of formal interventions, as well as the usual monitoring and advice which takes place. So in December 2014, an enforcement notice was served under Regulation 36 of the Environmental Permitting Regulations, requiring actions following an escape of litter from the site. This ensured any escaped litter was collected and that the site-specific litter management plan was revised. March 2015, another enforcement notice served under Regulation 36, requiring actions following a further escape of litter from the site. This ensured the further escaped litter was collected and that the site-specific litter management plan was again revised. Additional control measures were installed. February 2016, a Regulation 36 enforcement notice served, requiring the progression of engineering works to manage landfill gas. This notice ensured additional gas extraction wells were installed within a recently completed area on the site. July 2017, a Regulation 36 enforcement notice was served requiring improvements to the leachate management system on site. This notice ensured that more leachate was removed from the site rather than just being recirculated around the site. January and February 2018, 2 further Regulation 36 enforcement notices served, requiring the implementation of additional engineering works to manage landfill gas. These notices were served following odour issues identified from landfill gas emissions. The notices required the installation of additional gas extraction and further areas of capping. February 2019, a Regulation 37 suspension notice was served, preventing waste inputs while remedial works were carried out. The notice was served following complaints of odour from the site. The odour complaints were linked to an area of waste not properly tipped or covered. The notice required that this area of waste be reprofiled and covered appropriately. It was served on the 19th of February, the work was completed and the notice lifted on the 26th of February. So, as you can see, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a whole series of issues concerning smells and leachate and litter, and this is on top of the day-to-day concerns which residents have raised and continue to raise through the liaison meetings when they happen and with the Environment Agency. But of course it's not just the Environment Agency which is concerned with regulating the site. Gateshead Council also has a part to play through planning enforcement, and there is quite a catalogue here too. In May 2018 there was a report to the Planning Committee which summarised the outstanding enforcement issues, including restoration of some completed areas, ecological provisions, including nesting for sand martins, but perhaps most importantly, proposals for the drainage scheme on site. And as late as last week, the Council issued the company with a letter refusing to discharge all but one of the planning issues which had been raised. And all of this came after a stop notice was issued by the Council in April 2018, requiring the removal of caravans from the site. The caravans were removed, but really they shouldn't have been there in the first place. On top of this, we have a very real concern that the split between the operator holding the environmental permit and the landowner, who appears to be actually working the site, represents a real danger for the effective running of the site in the future. There have now been 3 applications for the transfer of the environmental permit and none have been granted. This has to raise real questions about the sustainability of the current arrangements and the transfer of the environmental permit, concerned and none have this been exposes granted. Our communities this has to raise real questions about the current sustainability, having sold the site itself, wishes to give up the permit. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents and I myself are well and truly fed up of the impact this landfill site is having on our environment and our lives, and we just can't understand why repeated breaches on planning and environmental grounds cannot lead to the landfill site being closed safely once and for all and the site being restored. I should say that in my experience, staff at both the Environment Agency and Gateshead Council have been very good and helpful in pursuing the issues which we raise, but we have had enough and believe that the site should be closed forthwith. So what am I asking the Minister for? Firstly, to strengthen the law covering landfill and waste sites to ensure that where there are recurring problems, communities don't have to continue to endure the problems arising from landfill sites. We need much stronger powers for the Environment Agency to act to really protect our environment and to deal with landfill operators that fail to make their duties as good neighbours. Secondly, to work with her colleagues in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to strengthen planning enforcement, but moreover to ensure that no landfill site should be allowed so very near to where people live, as is the case in Blaydon. There are families living immediately around the perimeter of this site who over the years have suffered from incidents directly affecting their properties, and there are the villages and the people who live in the communities just that little bit further around. Living next to a landfill site is never going to be pleasant, and we must tighten up planning to ensure that this can never happen again. Thirdly, to take practical and legislative steps to end the use of landfill sites by strengthening environmental legislation and reducing waste to landfill. And fourthly, and perhaps most importantly to my community immediately, to work with me, my constituents and the statutory bodies to see that the Bladen Quarry landfill site, like the neighbouring Pathhead Quarry site, is closed safely and restored to bring an end to the years of misery which my constituents have had to endure.
Minister Dr Therese Coffey.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Bladen on securing this debate, and she has spoken with eloquence and passion on absolutely representing her constituents here today. She's also referred to some of the work that I think was undertaken by her predecessor, Dave Anderson, who I know was also very proactive on this issue. And she's right to think, why is it taking years to sort this situation out? And if the Honourable Lady doesn't mind, I'll set out in a few ways on where I think action has been taken and where I think she's aware that action is still underway proactively. So it's important to ensure that we do have clear and strong environmental regulations and planning controls that work for the environment, for people and for business. And twice in her 4 questions, she asked about practical and legislative steps, including stronger powers for the Environment Agency. And I'm pleased to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in the next session of this Parliament, through the Environment Bill, we hope to bring forward exactly some of those powers to tackle some of these issues which she addresses. Also, in regard to reducing waste to landfill, it's been an ongoing policy and a success, actually, of the former Labour government and this government in gradually reducing, in fact significantly reducing, the amount of waste going to landfill, largely driven by the success of the landfill tax. And we will continue to do more to try and increase the recycling. Now, a well-functioning and regulated waste industry is essential for us. It enables us to maximise the efficient use of our resources and to minimise the impacts of waste on the environment. Now, the Environment Agency is the regulator for the sector in England, and my honourable friend from Strangford referred to the issue in his constituency. He is right that neighbourhood relations are very important for any waste operator. He'd be aware it is a different regulator that interacts, and he mentioned the strong community relations which the council in which he used to serve made sure that was able to happen. Now, the Environment Agency issues environmental permits for waste operators and regulates against them, particularly targeting operators who do not comply with the regulatory framework and in turn cause suffering to nearby communities. Environmental permits are issued for regulated activities carried out at sites, and in the case of a permitted landfill facility, such as that located at Bladen Quarry, the permit will cover hazards and risks arising from the activities on the site of the landfill. Now, the current permit has been in place since landfill activity recommenced in 2004. The permit allows for the deposit of up to 329,000 tonnes of non-hazardous waste within engineered cells on the site. Environmental permits do not cover wider planning controls, and nor should they if we are to avoid unnecessary regulatory duplication. And the site has planning permission to allow landfilling, and that was issued and continues to be governed by Gateshead Council. So while I'm conscious of her request to the MHCLG about enforcement and location, we do believe that councils already have the opportunity to do both of those things when they consider that, though I recognise the challenges on historic sites which they are no longer necessarily can relocate. Now, in May 2012, the permit was transferred from the initial operator to Niramax Group Limited. It was then transferred again in May 2013 to Octagon Green Solutions Limited, which continues to operate the site today. And in 2017, 2 applications were made to transfer the permit. Firstly, to the landowner, Recycological Limited, and secondly, to a company called Midwest Solutions Limited. A third transfer application was received in September 2018, again in relation to Midwest Solutions Limited. All these applications have been refused, most recently just last week, as the Environment Agency has not been satisfied that the companies had sufficient competence to comply with the permit. It is right that only properly competent people are able to hold a waste permit, and in this instance the Environment Agency was concerned the applicants lacked the ability to comply with permits and to run a waste site effectively. And this is in line with our work to tighten up the waste permitting and exemptions regime by raising the bar for people to operate in the sector. Now, understandably, the Honourable Lady read out a litany of non-compliance, which was then had notices served on them. And between 2014 and 18, as the Honourable Lady pointed out, the Environment Agency served a series of enforcement notices on the Bladen site for identified issues. These included, as she mentioned, the litter escaping from the site, for which additional control measures were then installed, whether it was improved management of landfill gas and leachate and additional engineering works following odour issues. And in February 2019, it was found that odour issues were coming from an area of waste not properly tipped or covered, and a Regulation 37 suspension notice was served to prevent waste input whilst remedial works were carried out. And as she pointed out, the notice was served on the 19th of February and the work was completed and the notice lifted on 26th of February. Now, the Honourable Lady is right to point out that there have been a number of breaches, but by and large, the company, perhaps cleverly, has responded quite quickly to those breaches, but of course we would rather they not breach in the first place. Now, there are also a number of planning contraventions on the site which are being investigated by Gateshead Council. The Environment Agency and the Council work closely together on this site and have ongoing engagement with the local community, including attending regular meetings. Now, I would encourage Gateshead Council potentially to do more on the planning enforcement in this regard. I know that the Environment Agency is concerned about the level of non-compliance with the permit, and following the issues which led it to serve a suspension notice in February, it is now investigating fully whether the operator is fit to continue to run the site and exploring its options regarding further sanctions. Now, in addition to consideration of prosecution, this could include serving a permit revocation notice which would prevent any further landfilling from taking place. Now, in the wider policy context, Madam Deputy Speaker, after our consultation last year, from this April the 7th, all permitted waste sites will need to demonstrate technical competence through a scheme approved by government. This change will provide the regulators the flexibility to use their full range of enforcement powers, such as enforcement or suspension notices, on all waste operation permits to ensure the operators are technically competent. The government recently announced a tougher approach to the regulation of environmental permits, including tightening up technical competence requirements and also allowing the Environment Agency to take a wider range of criminal convictions beyond environmental offences into account when considering permit applications of variations. Our resources and waste strategy commits us to the recommendations from the review into the serious and organised criminality in the waste sector, and this was completed last autumn by Lizzie Knoll. We will continue to bear down on criminal activity in the waste sector and drive those out of the sector who undercut legitimate businesses and make communities' lives miserable. So I'd like to be clear to the Honourable Lady and to the House. The Government and the Environment Agency does take regulation of the waste sector very seriously. I thank her again for raising this issue. I'm very much alive, as is the Environment Agency, to the challenges of residents in her constituency and beyond, and will continue to work proactively with her and to bear down on those operating in a manner which causes pollution, ugliness and, frankly, misery in the communities that they affect.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.